In the interest of diversifying my commentary, I've decided that for this video, I want to return to Europe and take a look at one of the parks there. I'm sure that from the title, you can tell that this video is going to be focused on Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which is located in the UK. While I won't be doing a comprehensive history of this seaside amusement park, I was surprised to learn that it opened in 1896, and actually has a large number of incredibly old but still operating attractions. The oldest that currently still resides in the park is the Flying Machines, a flat ride built by Sir Hero Maxim in 1904. Remarkably, I was intrigued to find out that the park contains not one, not two, but actually 3 wooden coasters. Built in 1933 and known for most of its life as just Roller Coaster, it was renamed to Nickelodeon Streak and painted to fit thematically into Nickelodeon Land, which premiered in 2011. It's unfortunately incredibly tacky, but at the very least is still maintained and able to be experienced. The other coasters include Grand National, which is a wooden dual-tracked racing coaster built in 1935, and Big Dipper, which is the oldest coaster in the park, as it was erected in 1923. Besides having such interesting vintage experiences, Blackpool Pleasure Beach is well known for the Big One, which is a hypercoaster manufactured by Aerodynamics in 1994, and originally sported the odd name of Pepsi Max the Big One as an incredibly strange sponsorship deal. Still, while this amusement park has an interesting history and what looks to be a pretty interesting selection of coasters, the focus of this video is actually going to be on the dark rides located throughout the park. I find that videos like these are a good reason to discover, learn about, and comment on attractions that are unfamiliar to myself and to most of my American audience. And so, let's dive right into the freaky dark rides of Blackpool Pleasure Beach. The first attraction that I want to take a look at is Alice's Wonderland, built in 1962. The ride begins by moving up curved inclines, which deliver you to the castle facade. Once you enter, the vehicle moves through a forest and down the rabbit hole, revealing your encounter with the White Rabbit. Now, obviously, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is in the public domain, and so anyone can interpret the story, but there's clearly visual cues lifted specifically from the Disney film and Disneyland's version of the ride, which opened in 1958. For example, the White Rabbit is wearing a red coat, which is famously a Disney interpretation, and the ride contains a few scenes inside an upside-down house, which was also a peculiar and unique element found in the original version of the Disneyland ride before its 1984 refurb. That being said, Blackpool's version of the story has a lot of interesting elements that are unique to it, such as an oversized Alice playing croquet, or this interesting leaping frog effect. I'm not familiar with the original story, so I don't know to what degree this interpretation is faithful to the novel, but this is a charming ride with a lot of visual interest. While it's also obviously based off of the Disneyland version in many of its aspects, it does also have many scenes not found in that ride or the film, and so it does manage to effectively distinguish itself in that way. I do also love these more traditional dark rides, which are known as pretzel rides, utilizing small cars that wind around tight tracks that twist throughout glow-in-the-dark painted sets, containing many moving elements. So while I still think that I prefer the Disneyland version, this is still a pretty interesting little dark ride that I would definitely like to experience one day. On the topic of small tracked dark rides though, the next attraction I would like to take a look at is Ghost Train, which was built in 1930. The ride itself has gone through a number of different iterations throughout its existence, but it has always been themed around horror, and today takes inspiration from a number of different stories and films. While the term Ghost Train has become an industry standard for these types of cheap-feeling pretzel rides that rely on jump scares and are often found at boardwalks and traveling fairs, it was actually this ride that used the name first and popularized it in the industry. I do like how after the first few scenes, the ride does go outside and moves up a small lift hill, which is a fun element, both for riders and as visual kineticism for people outside of the ride. As it reaches the top and moves back in, the vehicles move through an eclectic selection of random perilous scenes meant to scare riders. What makes this, and later ghost trains, interesting is that there's often no story or theme, intended for cheap and often ineffective scares. Still, this is part of their charm as a genre of dark ride, I think. Moving on, the vehicle then bursts out of a door and turns quickly, encountering a janky werewolf before then returning outside and falling down a dip. It then moves past an indoor scene that I can't really make out, turns outside again, and then moves into a scene with what I believe is meant to be some sort of monstrous gargoyle on top of a grave. A little more nonsense ensues, and the vehicle turns back outside, then going down another incline, but now slowly on a chain system. As the vehicle descends, a light reveals a skeleton sexily draped over a coffin in a graveyard, and as the vehicle levels and turns, the next few scenes are based on various films. These include selections such as The Exorcist, The Phantom of the Opera, and a number of other scenes that are probably based on something, though I can't quite determine what. After an encounter with a gate with zombie hands poking through, riders move down a long tunnel which simulates crashing into a train. Next, you'll see this weird scene of skeletons riding bikes, and if you have a keen eye, you'll spot Dracula just standing awkwardly in the corner on the left. With one last cheap jump scare, an alarm blares as you proceed back outside, and back to the station. Ghost Train is definitely weird, but again I think that's the charm of rides like these. It's here to amuse, not thematically satisfy, and I think that's why boardwalk-style dark rides are so interesting to me. Their constantly changing scenes keep things fresh, even if they're disconnected from one another, and I think make for odd but memorable experiences. For the next attraction we're going to take a look at, we're going to pivot to a water ride. Known simply as River Caves, and originally built in 1905 as a Tunnel of Love type attraction, the goal has always been to bring riders through various scenes taking place around the world, and they have changed numerous times throughout the life of the ride. As it currently exists, the boat launches into a cave and emerges into what I believe is meant to be China, with a narrator inviting voyagers to travel the many mysterious rivers of the world. Quickly, this scene transitions to dinosaurs in a cave, as Stravinsky's Rite of Spring echoes loudly throughout, clearly taking inspiration directly from Fantasia. Rounding a bend, riders can witness a lagoon inhabited by both cavemen and dinosaurs. Moving further ahead, more of these prehistoric creatures can be witnessed, contorted to somehow fit into this cave. Moving through the mist and into another dark cave tunnel, the boat then approaches scenes made to look as if riders are traveling under the ocean, showcasing marine fauna and various plants. As this scene progresses, riders move past a jungle swamp featuring African animals on the left, and a little bit further on the right, the next scene portrays a flamingo and later what looks to be a giant dodo standing in the water in front of what I believe may be an Aztec temple. The next section of track is rather lengthy, bringing you through a cavern lit with purple lighting and stars appearing on the ceiling as an orchestral score sways throughout. Rounding a bend, the boat approaches the Valley of the Kings, and moving through the arch, the narrator reappears, describing the archaeological significance of the scene ahead. It does appear to have once had animatronic figures, but in more recent videos it seems that they've been removed. After moving through a few chambers with impressively sized Egyptian statues, the boat then moves on to a brief but large scene of an Indian city. As the boat climbs a lift hill, the narrator begins again, stating that this abandoned city was once home to millions, and riders can observe that it has been reclaimed by the jungle. On cresting the hill and returning back outside, the boat then dips down a short drop and splashes into the water, before then returning to the station. I don't really have much to say about River Caves other than I appreciate its quirkiness. While some of its scenes are a little too short, it does achieve its goal of bringing you around the world, and it does seem to have a strong and mysterious atmosphere. Yet, the overall experience still manages to seem like it would be rather relaxing, and the large variety of scenes provides riders with a lot of memorable moments. Continuing on to our next attraction, Wallace and Gromit's Thrill-O-Matic is a dark ride that takes riders on a train through various scenes from this particular film series. This attraction reuses the ride system of its predecessor, which was the western-themed Gold Mine, moving visitors on slow-moving trains, not unlike the Calico Mine ride at Knott's Berry Farm, or Silver Mine at Phantasialand. Gold Mine opened in 1971, but was rethemed into Wallace & Gromit in 2013, turning the former trains into Wallace's slippers to bring you through the films. As riders depart the station, the first scene portrays the plot of A Grand Day Out, bringing everyone into the workshop as Wallace and Gromit work on the rocket that will bring them to the moon made of cheese. The ride then continues on, showing scenes from the antics of The Wrong Trousers, and later A Close Shave, which is the last film in the series that I vaguely remember watching when I was a child. The ride then continues and briefly portrays the stories of both The Curse of the Were-Rabbit and A Matter of Loaf and Death. While this attraction isn't really great, and the claymation style of the films does translate well into visually interesting scenes, this ride is ultimately just a run through the films and not much else. I also think that reusing the same train system from Gold Mine was a mistake, as the scenes are lit up and activated as riders go by, but are way too brief, leading to people in the back car of the train missing the actual scenes before they end. Otherwise, while the scenes are decently executed and interesting, around half the attraction does take place in the dark. Wallace & Gromit's Thrill-O-Matic is fine, and I think might count as another relaxing experience like with River Caves, but it's not really remarkable in any other way. Finally though, we've now reached what is arguably the most interesting attraction in the park, one that has continued to generate a lot of interest since it opened in 2000. While technically a log flume, I do consider Valhalla to be a dark ride worthy of mentioning, and it's certainly an attraction that is well known globally. However, it did close for a lengthy period of time in 2019, and only reopened recently this year, so I'm going to take you through the ride as it was, and highlight the differences after its lengthy refurb. The attraction first starts outside, as riders board longboats, and as they approach a waterfall, it shuts off as they enter the building. In a brief scene, boats pass by dogs guarding the way ahead, and the boat begins climbing a lift hill that passes underneath Fenrir. Continuing into a rock tunnel that is supposed to rotate around riders, the boat approaches the top, and a projected face of what is supposed to be some sort of godlike figure recites a mysterious poem, preparing riders to enter the warrior realm of Valhalla. Heading down a small hill with a large splash into the boat, strobes light the walls, and Nordic chanting is heard. A face with illuminated eyes appears on the right, and just a bit further, a creature lifts its head to look at the riders. Traveling now into a long section with simulated fire on both sides, the boat meanders until it reaches a cave opening, allowing for views into the park. The boat then parks on a turntable and rotates to then go backwards, which seems to me to obviously be inspired by Maelstrom and Epcot. After splashing down into a brief tunnel section with strong gusty winds being blown at riders, the vehicle is then brought to another turntable, and the boat resumes forward motion, moving through a dark tunnel and emerging into an icy room representing Fimbulwinter, which precedes the coming of Ragnarok. The room itself blasts already wet riders with cold, chilling air as they observe the frozen figures, and the vehicle yet again moves into a dark tunnel. Briefly, riders can catch a glimpse of a menacing skeleton Viking before unexpectedly plunging down a steep drop, flying past a ghostly longboat, and passing through a tunnel made from water jets. On approaching a new structure, riders can see that they'll be drenched under a waterfall, but as the lights go out and blind them with darkness, it shuts off and the boat begins another ascent on a lift hill. On reaching the top, the boat splashes down under eerie skulls and past two warriors, then rounding the bend and into a forest, where riders will narrowly miss a number of traps that intend to either crush or pierce them, as air bursts also simulate arrows being fired in their direction. Continuing a bit forward, riders pass by a number of ghastly elements, including a large skull and hanging skeletons, as the boat then plunges down the final drop with a massive splash. On reaching the end of the hill, the scene begins to catch on fire using special effects, and as riders continue forward into a Viking graveyard, massive fireballs erupt on both sides of the boat. Traveling back outside, the boat returns to the load station, but not before a surprise geyser startles riders. So, while there aren't many moving figures and a lot of the ride is in the dark, Valhalla does manage to really stand out because of its dark Norse mythology theme, and because of the wind, cold, and fire effects. As a water ride, it appears to be quite cruel in how it plays with riders, and still manages to soak them at unsuspecting moments. But if you're a fan of water rides, then this is certainly up there in terms of getting absolutely drenched. In terms of how the ride has changed after its massive refurb, there's a decent number of things to discuss. First, some scenes such as the first lift hill received new music, narration, and lighting effects to better convey the story, which I believe is probably seen by many as an improvement. In the scene where it seemed as if the boat was going to fall outside, the opening has now been covered and the turntable now faces riders forward into the drop below. In the Fimbulwinter scene, the cold chill effect is reportedly gone, although there are no artificial snow flurries present, and the skeleton Viking statues now have a new lighting effect. Finally, the forest scene adds a few new elements that include bells, crows, and more ethereal warriors in some capacity. While many are excited to see this iconic attraction return, reviews do seem to be mixed as the loss of certain iconic elements, such as the backwards drop and the cold air, have been removed, which, not having experienced it, even I agree is a loss as well. So while Valhalla is certainly not the best flume ride out there, it's still one of the most iconic, and I'm glad that it still exists, because I hope to get to finally experience it in the relatively near future. While I cannot attest to how good Blackpool Pleasure Beach is in terms of its operational efficiency or general park experience, I'm certainly interested in visiting for a number of different reasons. Its vintage wooden coasters seem like fun credits, and the big one is interesting because of how rare aerodynamics hypercoasters tend to be. However, the real stars for me are going to be the various dark rides offered throughout the park that I've just discussed, and I have to say that I really like all of them, even if I felt that some were weaker than others. It's easy to dismiss Alice's Wonderland when compared to the Disneyland version, but from what I know of its experience pre-1984, I would actually say that Blackpool's version holds up better. By the current standards of the ride, no, but Alice's Wonderland is still a charming and lengthy dark ride with a lot of interesting and eclectic scenes. Speaking of which, while Ghost Train is a bit of a mess of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, that's also very much part of what makes it intriguing. It reminds me of other boardwalk amusement rides located throughout the United States. I'm glad to see that it still exists, and I think its weirdness is what makes it stand out to me. In terms of River Caves and Wallace and Gromit, both attractions could use some editing to make their experiences feel a little better put together, but they're certainly not bad by any means. In fact, I would say they're both quite interesting, and at the very least seem like a good reason to relax, even if the content of their attractions doesn't really resonate with you. Finally, Valhalla is a major draw to the park for many people, and has been recognized as one of the better water rides throughout the world. While its most recent refurbishment seems to be getting mixed reception, it still seems like a fantastic ride worth going out of your way to experience. So, whether you're familiar with the park or not, hopefully you enjoyed this look into the dark rides of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, because I certainly had fun discovering them and offering my thoughts. If you've watched this far into the video and have not yet left a like, that's something that you can do to really help me out. As always, if you have not yet hit the subscribe button with bell notification, you can do so now to be alerted to new videos as they release.